E esta pessoa está sentindo necessidade
And someone is
de
feeling the
ouvir
need
mais sobre atributo que diz
to hear more about an attribute
reconhecer
that
quando
says,
Sirius os enviar
recognize
os que
when
estiveram
Sirius sends
presentes no
them,
princípio.
those who are present in the beginning.
Praticamente, todas as hierarquias maiores
Practically
que
all the
servem
major
na Terra
hierarchies that serve on earth
são hierarquias coligadas com Sirius.
are hierarchies
Porque uma
linked
hierarquia
to
maior,
Sirius,
ela
because a major
transcende o
hierarchy
âmbito do sistema solar.
transcends the sphere
E
of the solar
o
system.
primeiro sistema solar que diz respeito ao
And the
nosso
first
é
solar system
Sirius.
that refers to ours
Então
is
toda
Sirius.
hierarquia maior está em contato com Sirius.
And so every major hierarchy is in
Refiro a estas
contact with
hierarquias
Sirius.
maiores que nós conhecemos, que estão em
I'm
contato
referring here
conosco.
to the major hierarchies that we know that are in contact with us.
Quando Sirius os enviar,
Recognize
é
when
nós
Sirius sends them
estarmos abertos e estarmos receptivos
is for us to be
a
open and
essas
to be receptive
hierarquias
to these
maiores.
hierarchies, these major
Estarmos
hierarchies,
receptivos a estas grandes energias.
to be receptive to these great
Essas
energies.
hierarquias, por lado, podem parecer muito
These
distantes,
hierarchies, on one hand, may
mas
appear to
sempre
be
que se
far away,
reúne e sempre que se confirma,
but every time
ou
there is a
sempre
gathering
que
or a
existe
confirmation,
a possibilidade
or there is the
de formar
possibility
grupo de mônadas,
of forming a group
então
of
grupo
monads,
de mônadas
then a
já
group of monads
consciente do serviço, isto
already
já é
conscious of
ponte
service,
para
this
essas
is already a
hierarquias.
bridge to these
Isto já é
hierarchies.
uma ponte.
This is
Então nós
already a
podemos
bridge.
aqui no nível consciente
So here on the
não
conscious
termos
level,
nenhum sinal de uma
we might not
hierarquia
have any
maior.
sign
Podemos
of a
no
major
plano
hierarchy.
consciente não ter nenhuma
On the conscious plane,
impressão de
we might not have
contato
any
com uma
impression of
hierarquia maior.
contact with a major
Mas se
hierarchy.
nós passamos a vida afirmando
But
que
if we
se
spend
faça
our
a
lives
vontade superior
affirming
para nós,
that the higher will be
então
done
nós
for
vamos
us,
fazendo contato com a nossa mônada.
then we are
E aí,
making a
através
contact
deste
with our
contato
monad.
com a nossa mônada,
And
se
through
a
this
nossa mônada
contact
já
with our
está
monad,
agrupada com outras,
if our
então,
monad is already
este
grouped
grupo
together
de
with others,
mônadas não
then
deixa
this
de
group of
ser
monads
uma espécie de canal
is a kind
para
of channel
alguma projeção destas
to
hierarquias.
some projection of
Então
these
não se
hierarchies.
trata de, como pensam algumas pessoas,
So it's not
de
a question, as
estar
some people
invocando
think,
a hierarquia maior, de
of
estar
invoking the major
buscando a
hierarchy,
hierarquia. Não, você
of
deve
seeking the
buscar
hierarchy.
fazer a
No,
vontade
you must
suprema.
seek to do
Você
the
tem que
highest
buscar
will.
fazer a vontade
You must
superior
try
para
to
você.
do
Este
the
é o
higher will
caminho
for you.
para
This
se
is the way
chegar a contatar uma hierarquia maior
to be able to
através da
contact
mônada.
a major hierarchy
Nunca
through the
através da
monad,
personalidade,
and
que
never
isto não
through the
existe.
personality,
A
because
não ser
this
que a
does not
hierarquia
take
maior
place.
esteja encarnada
Unless
aqui,
the major
mas
hierarchy
como nós
is
vamos ver em
incarnated
seguida,
there,
ela
here.
está encarnada
But
relativamente.
as we're going to
A
see as
hierarquia maior
follows,
não
it's
encarna
only
completamente.
relatively
Nenhuma hierarquia
incarnated.
encarna
It's not
completamente.
totally incarnated.
Então,
No
aqui,
hierarchy
teríamos
incarnates
que
totally.
transcender
So here we would have to
esta
transcend
devoção infantil
this
de
childish devotion
querer nos comunicar com hierarquias
of
maiores,
wanting
porque
to
o caminho não é
communicate with
este.
major
Nenhuma
hierarchies,
hierarquia maior
because
pode
this is not the
responder a
way. No
isto.
major hierarchy
Então,
can respond
o
to
caminho
this.
é você se dispor a seguir
So
a
the way
vontade
is for you
maior
to be willing
para
to
você.
follow the
Você
higher will
cumprir
for
a
you,
vontade
to
maior.
fulfill the
Vontade
higher
maior
will.
quer dizer a vontade da mônada,
Higher
a
will
vontade do
means the
espírito.
will of the spirit, of the
A vontade
monad.
do espírito
The will
que
of the
está em
spirit,
contato com o seu destino
which is in
superior.
contact with your
Então,
higher
seguir esta
destiny.
vontade maior
So
é
to follow
esta
this
chave
higher will is the key
para se confirmar esses
to
contatos
confirm
ou se
these
confirmar
contacts
esses
or to
relacionamentos.
confirm these relationships.
E se a nossa mônada já respondeu
And if our
ao
monad
chamado
has already
para
responded
tarefas
to the
evolutivas
call
e para
to tasks of evolution
atuar dentro de setores do plano evolutivo,
and to work
então,
within
no
sectors
você
of the
estar
plan of
conectado com a
evolution.
vontade desta mônada, esta mônada
So
já
if
está
you are linked to the
começando
will
a
of this
receber
monad,
e
this monad
eventualmente
is
até
already
começando
beginning
a
to receive
transmitir
and perhaps
alguma
beginning to
vibração
transmit some
dessas
vibration
hierarquias maiores.
from these major hierarchies.
E aqui uma pessoa pergunta qual
And
é a
someone is
diferença
asking, what is the
entre uma
difference
hierarquia e uma entidade.
between a hierarchy and an entity?
Hierarquia é uma consciência que
A
já
hierarchy is a
transcendeu a
consciousness
evolução material.
that has already transcended material
E é uma
evolution.
consciência que já está
It's a consciousness
integrada
that is already
no serviço
integrated
cósmico
into cosmic
e já
service
está integrada
and is already
de uma certa
integrated in
forma,
a
num
certain
certo
way,
grau,
to a
na
certain
vida
degree,
cósmica.
in cosmic life.
E como estas consciências
And
que
since these
transcenderam a
consciousnesses
evolução
that
material
have transcended material evolution
possuem aquilo que se chama de
have that which is called
onisciência,
omniscience,
isto é, essas consciências
that is, these
tudo
consciousnesses know everything.
Então aí, quando estas hierarquias
So,
atuam,
when these
elas
hierarchies act,
atuam no sentido de
they act
que
in the
conhecem
sense that they know
todas as coisas
all things
que dizem respeito não só a
in
nós,
regard to us,
mas ao plano que
but
devemos
also to the
seguir,
plan we are
ao
to follow,
serviço que devemos
the
prestar,
service we are to
ao
render,
planeta no qual nós
the planet
estamos atuando.
in which we are
Então estas
acting. And
hierarquias
so these
têm
hierarchies
conhecimento geral
have a
disto
general
tudo.
knowledge of all this.
E estas consciências, estas
And these
hierarquias,
consciousnesses, these
elas lidam
hierarchies,
com diferentes energias.
they deal with different energies.
Então os nossos veículos,
And so our
ou a
vehicles,
nossa alma,
or our
ou a
soul,
nossa mônada,
or our monad,
deve primeiro começar a ser adestrada
must first begin
a
to be
receber
trained
diferentes energias.
to receive different
Porque se o
energies.
nosso ser não está ainda treinado a
Because
receber uma
if our
certa
being
energia,
is not yet
uma hierarquia não
trained to
pode
receive
agir
a
sobre
certain
ele,
energy, a hierarchy cannot work on
desintegraria,
it because it would
o
disintegrate
confundiria.
or would confuse
Então nós
it.
temos que desenvolver primeiro
So first
várias
we have to
energias
develop
nos
several
corpos,
energies in the
na
bodies,
alma,
in the
na
soul, in the
mônada,
monad,
para depois estarmos com estas hierarquias
so that then we
bem
can have these
presentes,
hierarchies
bem
close to
atuantes,
us,
ou o nosso ser
or our
estar
being
bem
has to be
coligado
well
com essas
connected to
hierarquias.
these hierarchies.
Estas consciências
These
podem se
consciousnesses
comunicar com mais facilidade
can more
conosco,
easily communicate with
podem
us.
formar fio e eventualmente
They can form a
começar a
thread and in time
colaborar mais diretamente
begin to
no nosso
cooperate
caminho,
more directly with our
quando
path
nós já despertamos
when we have
para
already
padrões de
awakened
vidas superiores.
to higher
Sem uma
standards of
hierarquia
life.
pode estar contatando ou
No
estar influindo
hierarchy
sobre a vida
can
comum.
contact or
Então,
influence
aqui,
ordinary
a
life.
consciência do ser
And so
deve
here,
estar já
the being's
despertada
consciousness
para padrões
must have been
superiores,
awakened
e a
to higher
hierarquia está aí
standards,
para
and the
ajudá-lo
hierarchy is
a
there
manter esses
to help
padrões,
keep
a
up those
desenvolver esses
standards,
padrões
develop
e a
these
elevar
standards,
ainda mais esses padrões.
and to
Então, a
elevate
hierarquia
these standards even
diz
more.
respeito
And so
ao
hierarchy
desenvolvimento dos
refers
nossos padrões
to the development
superiores
of our
em
higher
todos os
standards
planos.
in all
Então, nós temos que
planes.
ter uma
And so we
disposição
have to have
prévia
a willingness
para desenvolver esses padrões
to develop
e uma
these standards
possibilidade de colocar isto
and the
em
possibility
prática.
of putting this into practice.
E como grupos de mônadas
And since groups
já
of
estão
monads
coligados com certas hierarquias,
are already
grupo de
linked to
mônadas
certain hierarchies, a group of
considerado
monads is
parte da
considered
hierarquia.
part of a hierarchy.
Então, a nossa mônada
And so our
pode já
monad
ser parte
may
de uma
already be
linha
part
hierárquica.
of a hierarchical line.
E nós sentimos que a nossa mônada já é
And we
parte
feel that our
de uma
monad is
linha
already part
hierárquica,
of a
porque nós
hierarchical line
sentimos
because
em
we
todo o
feel
nosso ser
in our whole
uma
being
energia que nos leva
an
a
energy
participar da mutação do
that
planeta.
takes us to participate in the mutation of the planet, to take part in the transformation of the planet,
Não estímulo para participar
and
do
not a
planeta como ele está.
stimulus to take part in the planet the way it
Se a
is.
mônada está em
And so
contato com
if
a
the monad
hierarquia,
is in contact with a hierarchy, or if the monad is already part of a hierarchical line, the being, the consciousness of the being, is totally linked to the mutation of the planet. The being is participating in the mutation of the planet, participating in the transformation of things. This is a sign, unequivocal sign, that there is a contact of the hierarchy and the monad. And these hierarchies are stimulating the planet to develop vibrations that are higher than the current vibrations. So we as beings should also be open to these new vibrations, and our being should become permeable, receptive to these vibrations. And so the transformations in our vehicles, or in our soul, or in our inner bodies, or in our monad, these transformations are continual. And so if a being is in contact with a hierarchy, this is practically evident, because this is a being who is going through continual transformation, a being who is going through a transformation that is sometimes violent and is not holding back the impulses of this transformation. This means that this being is in contact with a hierarchy, and this being already has a link with these forces. A being who is in contact with this, and a being who is going through these changes, these transformations in such an intense way, this being already begins to be an instrument on the plane where he or she is, an instrument of purification for the planet. This being begins to be something that cooperates with the transformation of the planet, that is on the side of the purification of the planet, and not implicated in the contamination of the planet with the more negative part of the planet. And so here, this being is really at the service of the purification of the planet. That is, this being is totally surrendered to purification, because the being is part of the planet, and purification begins with the being, who accepts this purification as service, accepts it as part of the purification of the planet, and really the being is very grateful for every movement of purification within himself or herself. This is a being connected to the hierarchy. Or if this hierarchy has already reached a certain degree of purification, then the work of transmutation begins. And this being then receives this energy and this force that transmute. And as transmutation takes place within the person, this capacity to transmute things takes place. And the first things we receive to transmute are these things which are on the collective mental level, on the collective astral level, in the psychic field of the planet. And the hierarchy that should be connected to the monad regulates the monad, the soul of the individual, so that a task, a service might be adequate for the capacity of the monad, for the bodies. Because if the individual is incarnated, one has to take into account the situation of the bodies, the capacity of the bodies, the energy of the bodies, and all this the hierarchies organize. And as we purify ourselves, and these forces are being transmuted, we can transmute. We can transmute because we have the rhythm. We have the energy for this. we have the capacity to be in a deteriorated psychic field and transform it, and not be victims of it, but transform it. We enter into contact, and we are not controlled by it. We enter into contact, and we work on it. This is a being who is linked to a hierarchy. And so this is a continual work that the being does continually day and night. And when the external being is asleep, the inner bodies are working, and this depends on the degree of cooperation and influence that the hierarchy has there. See, these are the processes of someone who is in a spiritual group. Someone in a spiritual group has these processes to live through, recognizes these things, lives these things, puts these things into practice. Being in the world, doing these things. So here we would have to draw some conclusions from these things. Draw some conclusions, look at the thought for today, see if we can put the thought for today into practice, which is so clear, because while we are busied or busied beyond that which is strictly necessary, with all the things that are human, emotional, mental things, our real process takes place, who knows on what plane, on what level. And the farther away this process takes place, the less it reflects here in the world. And so our work of helping the world is minimal or null. Because today we help the world within the law of purification, the law of transmutation, within these laws that move the energies of the world and are taking the planet toward a different condition. This should be our process as members of a spiritual center. So someone might have in this process some point to be resolved, for example, to adjust something in the bodies in order to be an element of transmutation that is more efficient, more efficacious. This is a problem to be treated in a spiritual group. So we see, how are you going to be able to transmute more? How will you be able to better transform that which attacks, which happens? How are you going to be creative in circumstances that are not very clear, in circumstances that are not very defined? These are the questions that should be treated. This should be our day-to-day life. And so, as the thought for today says, we should try not to become too absorbed in that which is not service, because it's simple. We have to see, if I am in life to serve what is not service, I'm going to put aside, or I'm going to be involved the least possible, the least indispensable that is possible. Things that have no concern to me, I should not even think about. Not even think about them, because this is time and energy and capacity that we should be employing in our own part, which is always badly done, which always leaves a lot to be desired. And so here we really need a decision. We need a decision. And hierarchy is a consciousness that has already transcended all this. It's not even working on these things anymore. It's in another standard of being within the universe where it is focused. So, our contact with the hierarchy, our line of hierarchical light, is fundamental for us to get out of this ordinary human condition, this normal human condition. Without this contact, without this light, without having this present, without this brotherhood of consciousnesses that have already transcended all this, we really cannot move out from where we are. We spend life after life dealing with the same things in the same way, and we forget life, that for which we were created. Now the person had asked, what is the difference between a hierarchy and an entity? An entity can synthesize the energy of various hierarchies. The entity can be representing the energy of various hierarchies and not of only one system. An entity can be channeling various rays according to the level of this hierarchy, up to 21 rays. Now, while a hierarchy can give us the impression, or a hierarchy can give us the impression of an individual consciousness, an entity is a consciousness that is already liberated, so that an entity is already something that is no longer individual under any aspect. While a hierarchy may be found on the physical cosmic plane where we function, may be found on the astral cosmic plane, an entity has its essence on higher cosmic planes, above the mental cosmic plane. So we can talk about a hierarchy, we can name a hierarchy, we can recognize hierarchies, but an entity, we would have to have a higher perception. An entity has its essence, that which it really is, on higher cosmic planes, and it begins to be reflected on the astral cosmic plane, the mental cosmic plane, on the physical cosmic plane. It begins to be reflected, and as it is reflected onto these planes, the matter of these planes encases that part of the essence that is going to be useful on that plane. And so those who have the consciences on that plane, what they see of the entity is that part that was encased and not the whole entity. That part that was encased, and that part that was encased, which is a minimal part of the entity, it's the entity projected onto that plane. That which was encased gives the illusion to the observing monad that the entity is an individual, that the entity is that which was encased. And in this way, an entity can have a projection of itself, a tiny projection of itself, reflected on the mental cosmic plane, and then there that is recognized as being a cosmic entity. It can send another extension to be reflected on the astral cosmic plane, and that can be encased in the matter of the astral plane. And so the observer says that here is an entity. But there is never an entity here, because the entity is a free consciousness. It's not part of that consciousness that was encased for you to perceive it, for you to understand it, or for you to contact it. There, where it was reflected, it is encased, and there it remains, sacrificed in a way, contained. We see it this way. because the entity is not there. The entity is completely liberated, and you cannot perceive it as anything specific. So we have the illusion that an entity evolves, that an entity is manifesting something different. We are in contact with another aspect of it that was captive of the matter on that plane where you can understand it, so that you can understand something. And the work the entity does in you is through that little portion that you can perceive of it. Through that little portion of it, you are then expanded, opened. And so you are before an entity, but you never see anything that is stable. Is working on you for you to see more, for you to perceive more. And this work with the hierarchy is in total harmony when you are there, but you withdraw from the entity. Then you become a part of the impulse. You become a part of that force. And that is why entities do not reinforce those levels in which they are prisoners, in which they are known. The entities are working on us so that we can be liberated from all these limitations. And if an entity, because it can happen, if an entity has some aspect that is going to be manifested on some plane, then that aspect has to be introduced from plane down to plane. And on that plane, or the physical plane, that which the physical plane can bear, and that then is encased with the matter of that plane. And the farther down the entity goes, the more limited it is, the more hemmed in it is. And even the consciousness of the entity on this plane where it is focused is not a consciousness as vast as it really is. The consciousness becomes reduced. So if there is a hierarchy, an entity, a major hierarchy that is incarnated, that where it is incarnated, it is very limited. It is reduced, but as consciousness as well. It's not that it is there limited, knowing what it is there limited in consciousness as well. It is there completely closed in a circle that plane can support. And that part of the consciousness is really sacrificed there, is really circumscribed there. And it's not participating in the rest of its life. And all this is a situation that refers to a consciousness that is no longer individual, but seems to be an individual, because it went on adapting itself until it reached the point where it seemed to be an individual, that it functions like an individual. And the situation of this entity, that it is there, but it is not all there. It's something very strange. And you have to live with this. You have to take this as it is, because this forms a line, and on each level where this happens, it is creating things. Because something like an entity can only act here by being limited, and it's these limits which permit and the construction to take place on each plane. If it were not for these limits, no work at all could be done on any plane, because the plane could not bear it, the light would be too strong, the energy would be destructive, and so it's all a process of joy of serving through sacrifice. And this is the great joy of an entity when it is projected here. It's a great joy. It's a joy within sacrifice. But this sacrifice is to know that it is here, but I don't know how. So a hierarchy and an entity are a little different. And all this is there together, there in the universe where we can move and have our being. These are things that seem to be beyond our understanding in the present process. But this is all part of the field of the monads. All this is life. All this is the perceptions, the flow in the field of the monads. And our contact with the monad has as its principal key our intention to fulfill the higher will. An entity has the capacity to absorb consciousnesses, not absorb consciousnesses in the sense of annulling them, of killing them. An entity has a field of life where there is no death. So when we say that an entity has absorbed a consciousness, or a consciousness has entered the aura of an entity, this means that that consciousness begins to receive the grace of being in a vibratory level that is much wider. And generally these consciousnesses that are absorbed identify themselves with aspects of the service of that entity. So if a consciousness is serving within an entity, it is absorbed not to disappear, it is absorbed to become identified with that part of the service that the entity is to render on a specific plane. And the service rendered on a specific plane needs the consciousnesses of that plane, a network of consciousnesses to fulfill the task, to carry out the service. And so an entity might not be serving directly, might not be in a direct action on the plane, but it could be absorbing consciousnesses from that plane, and those consciousnesses would then manifest the work, the service, and this makes the fulfillment of the service much more viable because there are various consciousnesses, various levels of consciousness, each one fulfilling a part of the service that is up to the entity, and the entity maintains that group of consciousnesses. And that group of consciousnesses, through this service, becomes more and more united. And this group of consciousnesses may, in other cycles, form an entity. And so we say that an entity is a liberated consciousness. But I wonder how many individuals are in there. Only today they are no longer individuals, they have become an entity. So we can study the evolution of man up until the monad. After that it becomes difficult to explain because this transformation into an entity is not of an individual, it's of a whole group of consciousnesses who remain in the aura of this entity at different moments. In inner Figueira, all these things are happening. All these things are worked on. And this is what takes place in inner Figueira. So in some way, we are related to all this.
conexão com tudo
In
isso.
some way, we have a connection to
Aqui
all
na
this.
figueira externa,
Here
nós
in
temos
Outer
vários
Figueira,
mantras
we have several
que
mantras
afinam a nossa vibração com estas
which
coisas.
attune our vibration to these things.